The Daniel Craig era of James Bond comes to a close with the release of No Time to Die, the 25th James Bond film and the 5th Bond film starring Daniel Craig. This film has had a pretty troubled release schedule. We were originally meant to get this film in March last year, but it was pushed out for, well, obvious reasons. So after a delay of almost 18 months, we finally got to see No Time to Die. So is it any good? Well, before we get into it, let's take a look back at the Daniel Craig era overall. After 20 previous James Bond films, it was a good idea to go back and take a look at Bond from a different angle, and that's what Eon Productions did during the Craig era. Bond is cast in a role more similar to that of Jason Bourne or Jack Bauer than a smooth international spy type in these films. It was a more back-to-basics approach to Bond, doing away with the gadgets and some of the more camp over-the-top tropes from the previous eras of Bond. One of the aspects of this iteration of Bond that I've always really liked is the battle damage that this version of Bond carries around with him from film to film. Right from the end of Casino Royale, Craig's Bond is damaged goods. He's never really gotten over the death of Vesper Lynd, and you see Bond only deteriorate more and more as the films go on. By the time we hit Skyfall, Bond is ready to pack it in. He's disillusioned with being a spy and even admits that he's pretty much just a hired killer for the government. He's also getting older, which other characters are starting to point out to him. These are good areas to focus on with a character like Bond. It was new ground that was never covered in previous iterations, and Craig really sells you on this battered, damaged version of Bond. You see the effects this life has had on him. The cost of being a 00 really weighs down on Bond in this series. The damage has been the one common through line between all of the movies in the Craig era. In the previous Bond films, there isn't much in the way of carryover between the films. There's a loose continuity, yes, between the older films, but Bond for the most part just jumps from one film to the next without much thought or consideration for the events of the previous films. The Craig era is the total opposite. Craig's Bond is pretty much driven by the events spinning out of Casino Royale. The Craig era of Bond feels more like one larger story told over 5 films with Casino Royale and No Time to Die as bookends for the series. The Craig era of Bond really did pump new blood back into the character of James Bond. It got people to sit up and take notice of the franchise again in a big way. In short, the Craig era brought Bond to a new generation of viewers. This wasn't your daddy's James Bond. This was a new James Bond for a new era. It recontextualized Bond as a more down-to-earth character, closer to the character in the original Fleming books. In short, this new take on Bond, it got people talking about James Bond again. It got them interested again. So this film picks up with Bond and Madeleine Swann living a pretty contented life together after the events of the previous film Spectre. During a ceremony in Italy, Bond goes to the gravesite of Vesper Lynd to pay his respects and finally put his past behind him. This doesn't go to plan though, because Spectre are waiting in ambush for him. After this failed assassination attempt, Bond goes into exile for 5 years until Felix, his old CIA buddy, asks him for help to find a kidnapped scientist and a stolen doomsday weapon. From here it's up to Bond, the new 007 Nomi, and his colleagues from the previous films Moneypenny, Q and M to stop this film's new big bad, Safin, from unleashing a new nanotech bioweapon on the world. To be honest, I wasn't really too sure what to expect going into this one. I was a big fan of Casino Royale and Skyfall, but I wasn't exactly the biggest fan of Spectre. But having True Detective's Cary Fukunaga come in as director had me interested to see what he would do with it. And it really feels like Fukunaga is tying everything off in this one. Christoph Waltz puts in another appearance as Blofeld. Jeffrey Wright is back again as Felix Leiter, Naomi Harris's Moneypenny and Ben Winshaw's Q are also back. It really does feel like Fukunaga is going all out for this Bond film. Some of the older tropes from the previous eras are brought back here. Craig is more like the classic James Bond in this one, more debonair and suave. He even throws off a few one-liners. There's a world-ending doomsday device and a climactic showdown at the villain's island complex. There's a few gadgets thrown in as well along the way. There's even a henchman with a strange physical deformity. The whole thing feels kind of like a love letter to the Craig era and to Bond overall really. Craig is throwing everything he has at it for this last go-around and it really shows. This film has 3 major set-piece action sequences. Of note, one really tense action scene in a forest in Norway, which sees Bond using tactics to get around superior numbers, which is a real standout. There's another at the end that's also worth mentioning, Bond working his way through a long corridor and up a flight of stairs in what looks like one continuous shot. This film looks beautiful as well. The cinematography is some of the best I've seen in a film recently. Every location looks stunning, even the indoor locations are beautifully shot and lit. The film jumps around between different locations like Italy, Cuba, and Jamaica, and they all look stunning. It's all really well shot and put together. The action scenes in particular really stand out here. Fukunaga brings a particular flair to the action, making it feel very different. The action has always been one of the strongest aspects of the Craig era, and this film is no exception. The fights and action scenes have a weight to them. When you see Bond get knocked down or blasted back, you really feel the weight of it. It's got a visceral feel to it. So this film introduces a new character in Lashana Lynch's Nomi, the new designated 007. There's a good chemistry between her and Craig. They share a good bit of back and forth, which is actually pretty funny at times. They bounce off each other nicely. Ana de Armas puts in an endearing performance as Paloma, a newbie secret agent on her first mission. She's not in the film for long though. She shows up for a great action scene about halfway through. Naomi Harris and Ben Whishaw get a bit more time to shine in this one, as does Ralph Fiennes' Mallory. Throughout the whole thing I was never bored. The film goes at a pretty quick pace and keeps you engaged. At over 2.5 hours, it's the longest of the Bond films, but you don't feel the time drag with it. If I do have one issue with this film though, it would have to be with the main villain. Safin, played by Rami Malek, isn't really very fleshed out in the same way that other villains in the Craig era have been. When you saw Casino Royale and Skyfall, you remembered characters like Le Chiffre and Raul Silva, but in this case, they don't really give Safin too much screen time. He's given a strong opening at the start of the film, where he comes across as an almost supernatural threat, but after that, he's not really developed much more as a villain, which is a shame really. Rami Malek is a good pick for a Bond villain. I think they could have really done something more interesting with him here. So is it any good? Yes, it's good. It's really good in fact. It's a film I haven't really stopped thinking about, and I've seen it almost a month ago. Particularly the scene with Bond working his way through Safin's complex, and the ending really stuck with me, but no spoilers. This film has been out since late September depending on where you are, so you've probably already made up your mind whether or not you want to see it by now. But if you have been on the fence about it, I'd say check it out before it ends its theatrical run. It's great to see Bond back on the big screen again, and this really does feel like a proper James Bond film. So where will things go from here? The film ends with the familiar line in the credits, James Bond will return. What direction Eon Productions will take with the next Bond franchise is really anyone's guess. But if I had to guess though, I would say a reboot is probably definitely on the cards. I would like to see the next iteration of Bond maybe go in a different direction, maybe even go back to the core ideas of the Fleming books and have the next series actually set during the Cold War. I can only hope that the next generation of James Bond films will be as interesting and as memorable as the Daniel Craig era.